Stop trying to be creative. This is going to seem like a bit of a weird video concept, but I think it's one that is also going to be quite insightful for many of you watching this. And what you have to understand is when I'm saying this, I'm not saying that creativity is inherently bad, you should never try and bring out that creative side within you or whatever. But 99% of the time in chess, it's about making good, sound, logical decisions, not trying to be some creative smart ass, because very often that is going to backfire on you. And one way I believe that many players try to be too creative is with their opening choice, especially for the black pieces. With the white pieces, you have a little bit more leeway because you know you're moving first. You can sort of play a bit of a shitty opening and still get away with it. But with the black pieces, that's a lot more difficult in my opinion. And for example, one mistake which I believe many players make in choosing an opening, especially say under 1600, once you're above that level things change a little bit. But this is certainly something that I did for a while that I think wasn't so good for my chess, was that, for example, against 1d4, I was playing the King's Indian defense for a while. Nothing inherently wrong with this opening, very interesting, rich opening that provides a lot of dynamic possibilities. However, again, it requires a lot of creativity to play. There's a lot of fluidity within the position. There's not really yet a defined structure. There's so many directions in which the game could go, compared to something a lot more static like the Slav defense, where you have a lot more of a defined central structure earlier on in the game, which in my opinion also makes it a lot more solid and easy to play. But also looking at say 1e4, something I wouldn't recommend to many players, say under that 1600 level, to be honest even above that level these openings are a little bit dubious, is something like b6 or maybe g6. b6 in particular I think is not so bad. It's something that I played a bit myself, more so online than over the board. But if I had tried to learn this opening, like I played this a bit when I was already maybe 2000, 2100, if I tried to experiment with this opening when I was like much younger and maybe like had a rating of, I don't know, 1000 or something, I wouldn't have really understood what was going on, because the creativity that would have been required of me when I hadn't yet even built like a solid foundation of chess principles and understanding would have made it very difficult for me to really actually adopt this opening in a successful manner. However, one thing I did sort of do right when I was younger, even though against d4 I was playing the King's Indian a bit, was that I almost always played against e4, e5, where the positions are a lot more simple because there's an equal amount of space in the center, and generally speaking, positions where the space is equal are a lot more simple and easy to understand and play, more importantly, than positions where you have a lot less space, as in a lot of hypermodern openings such as the modern. But I want to show some of the games now, especially from when I was younger. This game in particular I'm going to show right now, this is from when I was 13 years old. I had a FIDE rating already of 1800. Maybe I was a little bit overrated. Basically, this was a prime example of just trying to be too clever for my own good. So we had the following very logical looking moves: the Queen's Indian defense, natural development of the pieces for both sides. And in this position, a fairly logical move would be to maybe castle short. I do incur double pawns myself after the following moves. Maybe I could have also instead just played bishop e2 in this position and then castled short like this without having to worry about getting my pawns doubled again like that. But what I did in this position was, after bishop d3, knight d7, was I played long castles. And there's just a lot wrong with this move. I was trying to be like very aggressive. I don't think in my head I was like, oh, I'm being creative. But I do see this sort of tendency among a lot of players below a certain level to really like this castling long, especially when it creates this sort of, you know, opposite side castling dynamic where there's a lot of aggressive, fun attacking chess. But really just the way chess works, I don't know what it is, but most positions, most openings, long castles is just something which the position doesn't naturally sort of tend to lend itself to, especially in these openings where you play d4, c4, and you already sort of weaken your queen side a little bit. Castling on the same side really doesn't make much sense at all. The story would be a little bit different if maybe the pawn structure was somehow closed and black didn't have any pawn breaks in the queen side, but immediately my opponent just played c5, immediately once again breaking on the queen side, trying to punish white for the fact that their king is just really oddly placed on the side of the board. It doesn't belong there, and they're just simply much quicker in their attack on the queen side than white is with theirs on the king side. And just to be clear, that's not to say that long castles is never a good move. There's a lot of situations where it is good, but if I had $1 for every time I saw someone just long castling in some position where it looks kind of stupid, like I did in this game when I was younger, right? I would probably be a pretty rich man. And continuing off on that note, this was another game of mine. I was a bit older this game. I was 17 years old, around similar rating to what I am now. Actually, maybe even a bit higher because my rating's been crashing this year. But basically in this position, what I had decided to do was, well, first of all, if you evaluate the position, what's going on, right? Well, roughly equal looks like, material definitely is, but the real distinguisher in this position is the fact that our light squared bishop is a little bit better than black's one, so white probably has a slight advantage because of that. One sound idea would be to play something like bishop e2, get this guy off the c file, then triple up with the heavy pieces, maybe put a knight on c5. It definitely has some positional pressure to speak of. But instead of the game, I just started getting really crazy. I started playing like I was high on the testosterone, right? I was playing like f4. I played queen h5 on the next move. Then I started playing e4 and like bringing all my pieces over to the king side. I wanted to bring my rook in as well. I was pushing the f pawn forward. I was really just going complete nutso, right? But the problem was I just simply overestimated just how strong my kingside play was. And again, potential counterplay from my opponent, like counter-attacking the center or something like knight d4. And really after the dust settled on the next few moves, I had a very like iffy feeling about my position. A lot of stuff got traded off. If I can get an f6, if it was my move and I could get f6 in, I would be doing golden. But the problem is black has a move. They played queen f6 in the game, which is not bad, but allowed a bit of counterplay for me and I was able to survive. But if instead my opponent, who was an international master by the way, played rook d6, it really would have been incredibly difficult for me to make any progress, because if I play something like rook h3, rook h6 would be quite problematic. But fortunately, I was a bit lucky in this game in that my opponent did not play the most accurate move. He played queen f6, which I thought was quite good at first, but then I realized quite quickly that I could actually play my rook to this square, provoke h6, and then actually play queen g6, utilizing the fact that g6 is somewhat of a weak square now that the h7 pawn does not control that square anymore. Of course, they can't take because of the pin. They also don't want to play queen takes g6 because now they actually could be in some serious trouble if they defend it like this. Rook f3 and they're like really dead actually. Again, if they go something like queen takes b2, then they actually run into f6, a move we were talking about earlier. They're getting mated. So my opponent tried to play in the game rook d6 instead, and you know, I wasn't winning. I sort of had to hold and make some exchanges and whatnot. But again, like this position, this is not really the point of what I wanted to talk about. Again, I was a bit lucky in that my opponent didn't play the best moves, and really what I should have done all the way back in this position was not gone crazy. I shouldn't have tried to be creative again by like throwing my pawns over on the king side and doing something that really shouldn't realistically work when the center is so open. I should be sticking to a much more strategic sort of plan by just slowly improving the pieces, using what I have like the open c file for example, trying to infiltrate with knight and c5. Logical, sound positional chess, that was the way to go, not trying to do something random just because I sort of felt like it. And this is the final position I want to talk about in today's video. We're going to be talking a little bit about sacrifices. This is another sort of part of creativity. Again, nothing inherently wrong with sacrifices. They can be really good sometimes. A lot of players don't make enough sacrifices. But in this game, I was definitely sort of trying to be a bit too clever for my own good. I didn't really have much experience making these sort of sacrifices either. I just sort of thought like, oh, this sort of looks cool, I'm gonna like throw my opponent off. When in reality, the decision I ended up making was really stupid. But of course, to some extent, it's like you have to make these mistakes for us to realize in the future that you shouldn't do such things. So, you know, but anyways, let's see what happens. So, you know, we have this sort of complicated position. White has a bit more space. Black's pieces look a little bit awkwardly placed. So white probably is a little bit better objectively speaking, but in a practical game, anything can happen. A4 was what my opponent played. I played b4. I didn't want to allow something like a3 and sort of fixing this pawn's weakness. I wanted to protect it with a move like a3 myself. And now my opponent, who was a FIDE master, decided to play this move knight d4. And by the way, this was 2018, I think, the Australian Championships then. I was maybe like 15 years old, around just under 2000 FIDE, I think. And even then, I made the following next move, which was just really bad. I probably should have instead just played bishop takes d4, which is the most natural move. And one option is when black plays this whole knight d4 thing, they're inherently offering a pawn sacrifice. And what I did was I was sort of like, oh, he wants to sacrifice it. I'm going to amp it up a level and deliver a reverse sacrifice where I'm going to be the one sacrificing an exchange now. And I thought this was super clever because after something like takes ace, I'm like, oh, I have like queen g3, my knight's going to come to e2, I'm going to like pressure on the g6 pawn or something like that. But in reality, I was just off in like fairy tale land, dreaming about some bullshit that's never going to happen, right? And after bishop f6, I soon had to confront the reality that like, oh, like my pieces are actually all undeveloped. He's trading off my dark sword bishop, which was supposed to be a very important attacking piece, and I tried keeping the tension a little bit and like bringing my pieces in, but unfortunately after bishop b5 now, a very nice tactical blow from my opponent, well, I can't really avoid the trade of light squared bishops, and if I take it, well, I'm simply going to get made in a very simple manner like this. So instead of being a smartass again, trying to be like Mr. Creative, it would have been a lot better if I had just decided to play the more straightforward approach, take on d4, and not even necessarily take on d4, because black could potentially get some counterplay in this sort of manner, right? Where in general, what you have to understand is, okay, one part of the compensation that black has is that my queenside pawns and king shelter as a result is slightly weakened, and also a big factor is that when I play bishop takes d4, is that I'm giving up my dark sword bishop, which is going to weaken this diagonal in particular, and also leave black's dark sword bishop as an unrivaled piece on the board, which could potentially be long term a bit dangerous to deal with. However, I didn't even really have to go into this whole thing. I could have instead also just played in this position queen g3, actually forking this pawn and this pawn, and it turns out like this is really bad after something like knight f4 in this position, and rook takes d4 attacking this, and maybe I can consider something like that as well. And this was probably well within my capabilities, at the very least, seeing this whole like queen g3 thing. But again, I didn't see this because I was too caught up instead of playing logical, principled moves, trying to be Mr. Smartass and, you know, the whole thing that I've talked about 10 times in this video. So that just about wraps up for the video. Again, I don't want to discourage you guys from engaging in any sort of creative chess. I just want to really drive home this message in this video that you don't need to be as creative as you think, especially if you're under like 1600 or whatever. Being creative is more often than not going to be to your detriment rather than your benefit. You probably have an issue of being too creative, not creative enough. So again, just focus on the simple, positional, tactical, whatever stuff. Don't try to be Mr. Smarty Pants making all these clever moves, just focus on doing the simple things right. And if you're not yet at that level of say 1600, if you just consistently execute on those fundamentals, you should get there eventually. But anyways, hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, like, subscribe, also check out my stuff in the description below, the Discord, you can join that, my free newsletter, coaching. But anyways, hope you guys have a good day. I will see you until next time.